Good morning, all of you. My name is Bhatia, and we are going to start BHIE 141 History of China and Japan. And we are going to cover in this class Unit 12 and Unit 13. Unit 12 is not very much lengthy, as you all know about this, and Unit 13 is also is very lengthy, as you will see in this PPT in this class also. And now in Unit 12, what we will study about the formation of the Communist Party and the Kuomintang. Kuomintang was the group which was started in China, and after Kuomintang, they were starting to formate. They were starting to formate the Communist Party in China. We are going to cover about the history of China, and in this very transformation, the Chinese Communist Party played a very significant leading role at that time. It has to be noted here that in just 28 years after the formation of CPC in 1921, formation of CPC in 1921, the communists made their revolution and had formed a government. The most well-known of its leaders were Mao Zedong, Zhu De, Chen Zui, Liu Shaoqi, and Zhou Enlai, and the Xiang Qingyi. One of the first female Marxists in China was Xiang Qingyi. As you know, the names of Chinese we can take very differently because the names are like this. But apart from them, there were thousands of other active party members who formed the backbone of the party structure and came from among the workers and the peasants of China. And it is very important to comprehend the ideas and the role of Communist Party of China in revolutionary movement at that time. And this unit takes into account the social and the political milieu within which Marxist ideas emerged and grew the beginnings of Chinese Communist Party. How the Chinese Communist Party had begun at that time, what were the circumstances they were facing at that time, and the Communist Party, what type of members were entered into the CPC Communist Party at that time. Their early ideas and attempts at organizing the working people of China. And this unit also discussed the influence of CPC among the educated sections, intellectuals, and students. How the students and the intellectuals had given their role into forming the Communist Party at that time. It also accessed its contribution in radicalizing the Chinese people. How they make radical to the Chinese people, and they contributing to their forms of protest and shaping the nature of revolutionary movement till 1923. Because if nobody will show the revolution in front of the society, in front of the government, and in front of the all of the structure of that particular country. If nobody will show any radicalizing and any revolution in front of all, then nobody will accept the demands of that particular group. As you all know, these days, today I was facing a very big problem in front of when I was coming to this center. Then I was facing that very problem in front of me, because there is a very big traffic diversion in. On the borders when we pass from Delhi to UP. Then we are facing, because the revolution of the farmers, revolution of the peasants, we are facing at this time. That is the thing, when our revolutionary ideas came into face, then every people will face so many difficulties and so many problems, just like protest, just like protest things, just like they sit in front of the people that if the government will obey the demand of us which we are enhancing in front of the people for peasants and for all any group members, when the government will face these type of things, then definitely government will give some demands, some will obey the demands which we are giving in front of you. These type of difficulties they were facing at that time. And what is Marxist and what is Marxism in China? Next point is the birth of Marxism in China. The first revolutionaries were, therefore, from the more privileged middle class. In earlier units, we have seen how a variety of factors had contributed to the growth of nationalist and anti-imperialist anti-imperialist sentiments in China. A part of nationalism, there also emerged a scathing critic of existing religious, social, and political system, which was seen as backward and an obstacle to the growth of modern, liberate China. And the blueprint or model for these critics was the Western democracies, which were seen as modern and powerful and embodiment of the achievement of science and culture. The workers and peasants had their own grievances and they born out of the terrible conditions of their lives. And their own experience of struggle was teaching them new things. On the one hand, the Chinese intellectuals were making an effort to educate them politically. And on the other hand, the movements of the workers and peasants were opening up new perspectives of struggle for the Chinese intelligentsia. That is we can connect this from today's condition. We can connect this thing from today's condition as on this you can see and you can read on the screen that the workers and peasants were opening up a new perspective of struggle of Chinese intelligentsia in China. The workers and peasants were also fighting for their rights, and in India. This is the same situation which we are facing nowadays because peasants and farmers and they were struggling for their new rights. They wanted to fulfill their rights from the government side. Same thing which we are facing, the new consciousness which came from this linkage between the progressive ideas emerging in the Chinese society of the 1920s and the struggles of the working people was given an organizational shape with the formation of the CPC in 1921. The formation of the CPC was a reflection of this new consciousness. Next is the international context. International context, we have studied about the Shandong Resolution of at the Paris Peace Conference, by which Germany's right and privileges over Shandong were transferred to Japan instead of being restored to China, created a massive disillusionment in China with the West. The democracy of the West began to sound hollow and false. These sentiments clearly took a turn against Western imperialism, and Lenin's theory of imperialism and revolution seemed valid to the Chinese intelligentsia. Next is the success of Bolshevik revolution in Russia, because we are talking about Bolshevik revolution. We have studied a lot about the Russian Revolution. That is the Bolshevik revolution in Russia, and equally attracted the attention of Chinese intelligence. Russia became a prime and concrete example of a backward country overthrowing their old system as well as defeating Western imperialism. Marxism showed itself successful as a practical guide to political action and provided a Chinese intelligentsia with a philosophy by which it became possible to reject, which both the traditions of Chinese past and Western domination of the present. And this thing, Chinese intelligentsia with a philosophy by which it became possible to reject these things. Which things? Tradition of Chinese past and the Western domination of the present. And the Marxism henceforth became a powerful current in the Chinese national liberation movement. On July 1919 came the declaration of the new Bolshevik government addressed to the Chinese people and to the government of China, by which it gave up all the privileges and interest enjoyed by old Russian Tsarist government in China without any compensation. This was in striking contrast to the Shandong Declaration and 21 demands. We have studied in our earlier classes about the 21 demands. What was the political climate in China at that time? If we have studied about the fourth movement of 1919, May 4th movement of 1919 was an important landmark in the transformation of the political climate in China and in China in the direction of Marxism. And next is Chen Zui and Li Dazhao, and the founders of CPC were also leaders of the May 4th movement. For about 50 years, the leadership of CPC came from the May 4th generation, most notable among them being Zhou Enlai and Mao Zedong. The close and active association of intelligentsia with the workers during the May 4th movement had also contributed to the spread of Marxist influence. Marxist influence was mattered a lot at that time. A number of study societies devoted to the study of socialism were formed in the Peking University. New magazines, greatly influenced by Russian Revolution and the Bolshevik critic of imperialism, appeared on the scene. China's first general strike took place in 1990 during the course of the May 4th movement. And in the entire strike wave of 1919 to 1921, the intelligentsia participated along with the workers. And in May 1920, the New Youth and the leading magazine, the New Youth, which was the name of the leading magazine of the left-wing intellectuals, devoted an entire issue to discussion of labor problems. And the May Day celebrations were attended by professors, students, workers, and the next step was to give this interaction an organizational shape. And this happened with the formation of CPC in 1921. That is very important for all of you, the formation of CPC in 1921, because so many students, so many professors, and so many workers have participated in that formation of that particular area. And the May 4th movement of 1919 was very important landmark in the Chinese history at that time, and the which two leaders had participated at that time, Cheng Duzui and Li Dazhao. And the founder of CPC was known as Zhou Enlai and Mao Zedong. They were the leaders and they were the intellectuals in Chinese history at that time. And that is very important for all of you to know about the condition of farmers and peasants. That was very pitiable at that time because they were not well educated. And do you imagine that 90% of the population in China was illiterate at that time? Only 10% that we can denote that the rich people, the wealthy people, they can read, they can write, and they can do, and they can take decision at that time, because the maximum population was, the majority population was illiterate at that time. That's why they were demanding about their rights. They wanted to change themselves. Next is the social milieu. If we are talking about the social milieu and the social condition of China, then we can say the social milieu within which Marxism emerged was the terrible living conditions that prevailed among the working people from one end of China to another. In the countryside, poverty, abuse, early death were the only prospects for half a billion people. It was a society in which people were forced to sell their children, eat grass and bark in bad times, and pay rent and tax far beyond their means. And all this went on a while a tiny elite lived in a luxurious life. Elite people, wealthy people, and the people they were having rights in their hands, they were known as elite people and they were living a luxurious life. The rapid commercialization of parts of rural China and monetization integrated the rural economy into the world capitalist economy. But it also led to an intensification of the operation of peasantry. The grain merchants, the moneylenders, administrative officials all came from among the landlords and dominated the entire rural economy. And in 1921, however, the political horizon of the peasantry was still extremely limited. On the other hand, the CPC was also yet to realize the full potential of the peasant upheaval. This it did only after 1925. From then on, the communist movement in China draw its major strength from the peasants. The working class, through numerically a very small force in China, became politicized because the big industrial areas where it was concentrated were also the main political center of China. Its experience of struggle of higher wages and their demands and related to its daily life. And this also brought home to it the identity of interest between the political authorities and the factory owners. Their strikes were met with brute force by the police, which was the direct arm of the state, and a major section of workers was employed in foreign factories. This brought them into direct opposition to the forces of imperialism. The political milieu in the urban areas created by the May 4th movement, the growth of the press, public meetings, expansion with all this of the audience for new culture, new ideas, and literature, and above all, participation in the events of 1919 to 1921 were of immense significance in opening for the workers a whole new world. In May 1919, the Peking teachers, with their salaries unpaid for months and hard hit by prices, went on strike along with the workers. In 1920, the workers widely participated in anti Japanese boycott. There were, by 1921, 28,000 literate workers who returned from France after the war, and they helped to radicalize the May 4th movement. The communist groups and these workers found themselves as natural allies in the given situation. And this alliance culminated in the formation of CPC, a working class party in China, CPC. And the Communist Party in 1921, how it was formed. In autumn 1920, communist groups were formed under the leadership of Li Ta Chao. This was the leader Li Ta Chao in Peking. and soon they were formed in other cities. From August 1920, the Shanghai Group published a weekly called The World of Labor, and by January 1921, 23 issues had been brought out. From Peking, Li Dazhao brought out The Voice of Laborer, and in Canton, the group published The Workers and Women at Work. Zhou Enlai, Mao Zedong organized study groups in Hunan. A number of Chinese communists were also active in France. All these activities helped to bring around the communists more and more intellectuals and students. A meeting of these groups took place in July 1921 at a girls' boarding school in Shanghai in hiding from the police. The police, however, got wind of it and the venue was shifted on board as a pleasure boat at the tourist center in Zhejiang. This came to be known as the first Congress of CPC, Chinese Communist Party, first Congress of CPC. 12 delegates were present and representing 57 members of 7 different groups. There was also a delegate from Communist International. And here it was decided that to form the CPC, which was the name Chen Duzuan Li Dazhao, who could not make it to the Congress because of strict police repression of communist groups that were declared the co-founders of party. Chen Duzui was the first secretary general of the party. What were the early ideas at that time? The early ideas, just like number one, private property, the root of class oppression, is eventually destroyed. And number two is the political structure is guided by the interest of working people. They believed, as Marx had written, and the Russian Revolution had concretely proved that such a change can only come about by revolution. If we want to face some changes, then these changes will come from revolution. The Marxist theory was saying like this. The revolution based on the ideas of Marx was to be achieved through class war or class struggle. They believe that the interest of the ruling class and the working people are in conflict. Ruling class and working people, they both are in conflict. This was because the profits and luxuries of rich ruling classes are based precisely on the fruit of labor of the working people, for which the working people are underpaid, and the working people are not paid for their labor that much as the ruling class was facing, and the ruling class was in profit and they were living luxurious life at that time. That's why, again, on the basis of Marx ideas, they considered the working class to be the most revolutionary social force because it had nothing to lose except its chains. Since it is only the working class that earns its income entirely from its labor, having no property, and it is the only class that has no stake in social system based on private property. They were not having any private property as they are doing a lot of work and they were very much hard workers. Hence, it was natural that the working class would be most interested in socialism, which would enable it to have the full fruits of its own labor. In order to achieve these aims, it was necessary that the CPC organized the working class and it saw its own role as that of educating the workers politically because it had the representatives of the most advanced section of the working class. In having these goals, the conception of change, social transformation of CPC was far ahead of that of nationalists led by Gominda. For the communists, it was not enough to throw off Western dominance and the dominance of warlords in China. Influenced by Lenin's thesis, imperialism, the highest stage of revolution, and the experience of Russian Revolution, they believed that because capitalism had a weaker base in Russia, therefore, their country had greater possibilities of overthrowing the capitalist system. But they also saw that, as in Russia, they would have to first overthrow the system of warlordism and feudalism. And the early activities which they were facing at that time, 46 working class strikes in 1920, 50 in 1921. It was largely due to the efforts of communist groups that the working class became politically conscious. And apart from running classes and generals from the workers, they also addressed large public meetings of working class audiences. Their efforts included, and what they were included at that time, the setting up of Shanghai metal machines. Next is establishment of close contacts with Hunan Working Men's Association. Next is organizing the strike of rickshaw-men in Hanko and the formation of a railwaymen's union. Many evening schools for workers were also organized. For example, in Changza, Mao and his wife started an education movement. And in August 1921, a self-education college was started by 1922 and 30,000 to 40,000 workers. 30,000 and 40,000 workers were studying in many evening schools for workers were also organized. For example, in Changza, yes, this is done, and the small artisans were involved in it. In same way or the other, in Anyuan's mines, Mao successfully organized a party cell with 7 miners, which led eventually to the formation of unions among them. Means they wanted to literate more and more workers, more and more peasants, so that they enhance their demands. They know about themselves and they know about their demands. They know about their rights, and they start wanting what to fulfill their demands, what which they were wanting at that time. A committee for labor movement was also set up. Purpose of organizing workers in printing, tobacco, textile factories in Canton, and the first Chinese trade union. They wanted to make their trade union. Congress was held on May 1, 1922. The first large strike by women in the history of China took place in August 1922 in the silk spinning mills of Podong. Those rights they were wanting at that time. Next, which things we have done in our this unit 12, what thing we have done, just like the Chinese Communist Party founded in 1921. They played a very significant role in giving a new ideology to the people of China, because the people of China were not very much literate and they were not having any ideas to fulfill their demands and to have their rights. They were not having these type of ideas. The May 4th movement can be considered as the first attempt to spread Marxist ideas on an organized scale. Following the May 4th movement was the spread of the press, increase in public meetings, new literature, etc. And that contributed to the growth of new ideas. The CPC was responsible for the increase in political consciousness of the working class. And the first phase of CPC and the working class came to a halt due to the wave of repression. If education is compulsory, then the rights to know about themselves is also compulsory at that time and this time also. Next, Unit 13, that is very lengthy, and the struggle for control, the Communist Party and the Gomindan. How they control Communist Party and how they control the Gomindan. These type of struggles, which we will talk about this in Unit 30. The period following the May 4th, 1919 incident was marked by far-reaching changes. Sun Yat-sen party, after series of name changes, because became the Gomindang and held its first congress in 1924. The Communist Party was founded in 1921. Both parties came under the influence of revolution in China and the Kuomintang began to play an important role in China, bringing the two parties together but not for long. Because Sun Yat-sen was also a reformer in the history of China, and Sun Yat-sen, the three principles of Sun Yat-sen, which we have studied, which we will study in the history of China, democracy, nationalism, and that is other thing which we are going to study about this in class. Sun Yat-sen died in 1925, and Jiang Jieshi became the leader of party. After the death of Sun Yat-sen, Jiang Jieshi became the leader of the party. Jiang Jieshi launched a successful northern expedition in 1926 to defeat the warlords, but also carried out a party purification expelling CPC members from the GMT. The brutal tussle between the two parties reflected the differing views about how to transform China. The CPC under Mao Zedong undertook to nurture and protect its strength from creating base in remote areas as well as building its support among the peasantry. The experiment with republicanism in the decade after 1911 revolution brought neither economic nor political stability in China. The ineffectiveness of the Republican government made Sun Yat-sen think in terms of evolving new ways of fighting the imperialists and the warlords and underlined the importance of having a modern army. Next, the Communist International and China. How China was connecting with international things. International means other countries' things. The Communist International, which based itself on the ideas of Marxism, also had a stake in promoting revolutions in other countries, as these revolutions would necessarily represent the interest of large sections of people in opposition to those of vested interest there. In China, they saw that not only the workers and the peasants, but also the bourgeois and the middle class were opposed to warlordism. The social and political hold of warlords not only represented the interest of landlords as opposed to peasants. Means when the landlords oppose to the peasant, then the peasants get under the control of landlords. It also hampered the development of capitalism and modernization in China, since the class interest of bourgeois lay in the development of a modern China. They were opposed to the warlords. Their interests were represented by Gomindang, which struggled against warlordism. The interest of the Chinese bourgeois also lay in the opposing imperialism because imperialism too was an obstacle to the growth of advanced capitalism in China. Next is the formation of United Front, how they unite themselves. In June 1924, the Kuomintang held its first National Congress in Canton. Li Dazhao, Mao Zedong, other communist leaders also attended the meeting. And this Congress passed a resolution to admit members of the Communist Party in their individual capacity into the Kuomintang. A new party program and constitution were adopted. It also decided on some concrete measures regarding the reorganization of the Kuomintang. The manifesto of the First National Congress of Kuomintang in China was adopted here. Sun Yat-sen gave a new interpretation to his three principles in the manifesto. The Congress declared its three policies to be friendly relation with the Soviet Union, development of workers and peasant movement in China, cooperation with the Communist Party of China. These three policies they were adopting at that time. The Kuomintang was a revolutionary organization capable of leading the struggle for national liberation and against warlordism in China. The entry of communists into Kuomintang meant that the capabilities and the experience of a great number of very dedicated revolutionaries was harnessed to national struggle. There were eight communists and those sympathetic to their views among the 24 elected to the Central Committee, and Presidium of GMD was Li Dazhao, founder of CPC, making them influential force in shaping policy. As a result, there emerged a strong left wing within the Kuomintang. This meant the Kuomintang as a whole became far more radical in its politics, support to the workers, peasants movement than it had ever been in the years prior to 1924. Next is the Communist Party in China. There were some differences within the CPC over the formation of United Front. However, the emphasis on the world politics as well as of a social and political force in China was by and large accepted by CPC. The communist movement had, in fact, emerged in China in the context of growth of nationalism and the movement for democracy. National liberation was, therefore, a primary goal of the CPC. Communist movement emerged in China. Nationalism emerged in China. Democracy emerged in China. National liberation emerged in China. That was the primary goal of the CPC. The leaders of CPC realized that there could be no democracy, no improvement in the lives of people without first freeing China from stranglehold of imperialist power, because the imperial power was very much strong towards China. Moreover, at times there was a political understanding between these powers and the warlords. Therefore, national liberation was inseparable from a struggle for social emancipation in China. National struggle was must at that time because nationality in the people of China, that was very necessary at that time. If the national feeling and nationality will not become in the view of in the minds of the people, then before them no power can be separated from that country, just because just due to the internal feeling of Chinese people. they can change, they could change themselves. And the CPC saw that Gomindang was opposed to both imperialism and warlordism. Both things, Gomindang was opposed to these things. Its leaders also realized that the Gomindang in 1924 was a much stronger force in China than the CPC was. It had a much larger mass base and support among the Chinese people, more intellectuals and professors as members, more influence within the armed forces, and the greater finances and military equipment as its disposable. That's why Gomindang became very powerful. As if we compare from CPC, Gomindang was very powerful because professors, educated, intellectual people were the members of Gomindang, and the armed forces were with Gomindan. Greater finances was with Gomindan. Military equipments with Gomindan. That's why CPC was less powerful. The United Front was therefore the only way to unite large section of Chinese people in order to isolate the armies. Next is achievements and successes. How they achieve their goal. The first success for United Front policy came even as negotiations were going on. Supported by the Communist Party, Sun Yat-sen formed a revolutionary government in Gominda in March 1923. The Soviets sent Michael Borodin. We can say Michael, we can say Michel. Michael Borodin. The Soviets sent Michael Borodin, an expert diplomat, to help reorganize the GMD and GEN. Galen to help train the army. Along with them came 40 other advisors. In August 1923, Jiang Zishi, a young general, was sent to Soviet Union to study the Soviet military system. And with the help of Soviets, Sun Yat-sen was also able to establish the Whampoa Military Academy near Canton. The building of armies, the building of nationalist army was a significant achievement because it enabled the first major victory against the armies of some warlords. The control over the Canton base was complete by 1925. The nationalist government was moved to Wuhan in October 1926. The GMD troops began a military campaign for unification of China. This came to be known as Northern Expedition. Northern Expedition. Another important feature of United Front was its crucial role in promoting the development of popular movements during 1925 to 1926. The May 13 movement of 1925 particularly led to a series of strikes, boycotts, anti-imperialist demonstrations throughout the China. It was participating by an incident which led to killing of 10 demonstrators by the police of Shanghai's international settlement. The workers played a leading role in this movement. According to some scholars, this movement so radicalized Chinese political life that it can be said to have worked the beginning of a truly revolutionary period, paralyzed during this movement due to the action of working class. The GMT government, which controlled the area, backed the striking workers, provided them with funds. The student associations, Shanghai Chamber of Commerce, associations of street merchants, General Union of Shanghai answered the call of the communists to come out in protest. The wide spectrum reflected the political nature of the United Front and the success of United Front strategy. Mass movements and the CPC. Since the communists were the most active in organizing these popular movements. The period between 1921 to 1927 also saw a tremendous growth in the membership and political strength of CPC. As a result of the May 13 movement of 1925, the membership increased tenfold in 6 months. Tenfold in 6 months. It became 10,000 in November 1925, whereas in the early part of the year it had been only 1,000. Yes, same, tenfold. By July 1926, the membership grew in 30,000 and by early 1927, the membership grew in 58,000. The composition of Young Communist League also changed. Before 1925, 90% of members had been students. But by November in 1926, only 35% were students. The larger majority being of workers. And the CPC's capacity to mobilize mass also increased tremendously. When Chiang Kai shek Revolutionary Army launched its offensive, it was the CPC which organized 1 lakh 12 lakh workers and 80,000 peasants to provide a solid popular base and political strength to the military offensive. Following the pattern of Soviet Red Army, the CPC introduced a system to political work in the Revolutionary Army. This was an important factor in the ultimate success of the expedition. The army in its northern expedition was actively supported by the workers and peasants along its route. When the army set out, the workers who had taken part in Ganzhou, Hong Kong, strike, organized transport, propaganda, medical units. This involved a march of thousands of people along with the army. Break and repression. On the other hand, as the popular movements developed, there had already emerged a reactionary wing within the Kuomintang opposed to these movements. Sun Yat-sen had died in 1925. After his death, Jiang Zeshi emerged as the most important GMT leader. Since he was also the commander-in-chief in army, his political position assumed great significance. He decided to throw in his lot with those opposed to the CPC and the popular movements and provided leadership to the right wing. On April 12, 1927, he unleashed unprecedented repression in China with a surprise attack on the Shanghai trade unions. The weapons of workers were seized and they were slaughtered by the thousands. This was followed by similar brutalities in other areas. Strikes were banned, peasant association liquidated, communists were hunted down. Soviet embassy at Beijing was attacked. Soviet advisors expelled. On July 15, 1927, the GMD Kuomintang announced the formal expulsion of communists from the GMD. The communists were pushed into the remoter provinces of China, however, still remained under the control of local governors or warlords. There were military confrontations such as Sino-Tibetan War of 1930 or in Xinjiang where the governor secretly signed a treaty with the Soviet Union in 1931. Jiang Zishi backed an Uyghur rebellion against the governor. Reasons for the break. Why they want break? The reasons for the break between Gomindan and CCP lay in their different ideological positions, their different support bases. The GMD had within its ranks not only the small bourgeois means the lower middle and the middle class, but also sections of landlords and side by side landlords, urban merchants, and financiers who were opposed to radical program outlined by the revolutionary forces. This program implied a change in the existing social order. In fact, the partial success of United Front itself brought to surface the underlying conflicts among the disparate elements that the program of national unification had temporarily brought together. A decisive issue leading to the break between the two parties were also the agrarian question. The struggle against feudalism in the countryside was a bitter class struggle. The landlords were quick to attack the peasant movement, sections of officer, corps of Gomindang who came from the same social class soon joined them. They came out openly against agrarian reforms. Laws were promulgated restricting the rights of workers and peasants to protest or form associations. The Govindang no longer stood for political democracy either. Having made use of potential strength of the working people's movements, CPC links with them, Gomindang was now in a politically strong position. It had substantial areas under its control, links with the Western powers independent of warlords. It saw itself in a position of achieving its aim without the CPC and workers and peasants of China. Jiang Zhixi's violent expulsion of communists ensured that Chinese politics in the ensuing years developed along two separate and distinct lines during the period of United Front. Both the Kuomintang and the CPC stood on the side of political change and social transformation. The Kuomintang became the formal government of China at Nanjing and represented the force of nationalism. The CPC continued to struggle for revolutionary change, in which a radical agrarian reform was the main component. Evolution of a new strategy by CPC. Every new revolutionary struggle cannot be a replica of an earlier one, and neither the Chinese communists before 1927 nor the CPSU thought so. Besides, there was no clearly demarcated Moscow line or the Chinese path. The questions that the Chinese communists debated were also the question that the Russian communists had debated during the struggle. Some of these questions were based on themes such as number one, impact of international situation, role of place of their country in international setup. Next is class character of state in their countries. Next is correlation and balance of different social and political forces in the country. Next is backwardness of their societies in relation to Western Europe. Consequences backwardness for their revolutionary movement in its various stages. They realized that even the democratic stage of the revolution was the struggle for national unification. Democracy must be led by the working class. Mao Zedong, in his report on the Hunan movement, talked of the crucial and absolutely necessary involvement of the peasant. The post United Front stress on the peasantry was in fact based on recognition arrived at from the experience of the United Front itself. It was realized that the working class on its own was not strong enough to bring about the democratic revolution. That given the vacillating position of the bourgeois, a worker peasant alliance was the only foundation for democracy and social transformation. This resulted in the formation of various red bases, Soviet bases, liberate bases, and revolutionary bases, as they were variously called. The first red bases were located in the south, within the border of two or three provinces in regions that were remote and almost inaccessible. Jiangxi Soviet in Jiangxi, the armed forces of landlords were weaker than in any other southern province. It was comparatively far away from imperialist influence, and peasant uprisings had been more widespread than elsewhere. This new Soviet republic was formed in November 1931 with Mao Zedong as president. It was defined as a democratic dictatorship of the proletariat and peasantry. The Mao writing on the class structure of rural China showed that the landlords were the chief enemies of the revolution as they had a direct stake in the perspective in the preservation of the feudal system of agriculture, feudal property structure. These were the 10% of rural families who owned slightly more than half the land and were almost the only villages who did not till the soil. The peasants could be characterized as rich, middle, or poor, apart from rural workers. The rich peasants were those who employed hired labor from outside. Middle peasants were those who could make end meet in a normal year, with either hiring another else or working for anyone else. Poor peasant families were those who depended on the wages of one or more members for their subsistence and had the least land. The agrarian revolution aimed also at improving production. In fact, the change in the relationships of ownership had a very crucial bearing on the production process. It could realize a great amount of land form of backward feudal methods of organizing production. That was we have studied about unit 12 and unit 13. In our next class, we will cover unit 14. Thank you. Have a nice day.